I walked into our bedroom and froze. The scent of champagne and perfume was still lingering in the air, but it wasn't her. On the dresser lay a series of photos, my wife smiling, entwined with men I didn't even know existed. My name is Alex. I'm 32, I work in finance in Chicago, and I had been married to Jenna for 6 years. On paper we had the perfect life. A downtown loft, successful careers, friends who envied us, and a love story we'd both bragged about. But perfection has a way of hiding the rot beneath it. It had been her bachelorette party the night before. I had trusted her to celebrate responsibly, to honor what we had built. Instead, she chose chaos, something she assured me wouldn't happen. I'd been proud of how she managed work, friends, and life, and I thought that maturity extended to our marriage. How wrong I was. Seeing the photos was surreal. It wasn't just the act itself, it was the blatant disregard for me, for us. Her laughter, the glow of excitement in her eyes, every picture screamed. She had forgotten my existence in that moment. My chest tightened, my hands shook, and for the first time, I felt like the ground had completely dropped out from under me. I sat on the edge of the bed, scrolling through the images. There was no misunderstanding here. This wasn't flirtation or a moment of weakness, it was deliberate. A celebration of betrayal disguised as fun. Each snapshot made my stomach turn. But beneath the shock, something else started to stir. A cold, calculating thought. If she could act without care, I could act without noise. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I didn't beg. I closed the photos, set my jaw, and walked out like nothing had happened. Friends called that evening, worried about last-minute wedding prep. I smiled, told them everything was fine, and kept the secret burning in my chest. Over the next few days, I played the part perfectly. The supportive, loving fiancé, the man who had no worries. At work, I buried myself in spreadsheets and meetings. At home, I laughed at her jokes, poured her wine, and planned the final touches for our wedding. Every gesture was a mask, every smile a lie. Inside, I was vanishing. Not literally, but in the sense that I withdrew quietly from the woman who had shattered trust. She noticed, eventually. The subtle pullback in attention, the way I stopped sharing details about my day, the way I answered questions with careful neutrality. Jenna's confusion was delicious in a quiet way. She thought she had dodged accountability. She thought the betrayal was safe. But it wasn't. Because I was planning the ultimate form of justice. Not a scene, not a confrontation, not humiliation. Just absence. Quiet, undeniable, irreversible absence. The first day I executed the plan, she asked me what was wrong. I smiled, hugged her, and whispered, "Nothing. I'm just busy." She believed it. She had no idea that with each passing hour, I was slipping further from the life she had ruined, taking with me every ounce of control, every piece of intimacy, every shared secret that had once bound us. The wedding invitations were sent, the rings polished, the photographers booked. And I stayed present, charming, seemingly in love. But the spark she thought she could count on? That was extinguished in a quiet, deliberate way. My presence became performance, not participation. She started noticing the distance, of course. She tried to reclaim it with flirty gestures, whispers of apology, and soft touches. I accepted none of it. I didn't confront her. I didn't lecture. I simply remained absent. The silence between us grew heavier than any argument ever could. I watched her panic quietly, like a storm building just out of sight. Friends noticed, but I waved off concerns with practiced ease. Work was demanding, stressful. Everything was fine, perfectly fine. She had thrown away our trust, our years together. But she didn't realize that revenge doesn't have to scream. Sometimes it waits, silent, until the absence itself becomes unbearable. The weeks after the bachelorette party were surreal. Jenna was still in party mode, still glowing from the thrill of what she had done. She expected me to implode, to beg, to confront her like a man scorned in every story she had ever heard. But I didn't. I didn't need to. Her expectation of chaos was my leverage. I started spending more time at work, taking projects that required late nights and early mornings. I told her I was swamped, that deadlines were brutal. She offered to help, tried to join me in the office occasionally, but I smiled politely and shook my head. "It's fine," I'd say. "I've got it." Each refusal, each extra hour away from home, subtly reinforced my absence, my quiet withdrawal. She noticed. One evening, she cornered me in the kitchen, leaning against the counter, wine in hand. "Alex," she said softly, "you've been different. Distant. Are you mad at me?" I looked at her, really looked, for the first time since that night. Her eyes, wide and anxious, betrayed a hint of fear. "I'm not mad," I said evenly. "Just tired, I guess." She laughed nervously, thinking she had deflected the tension. She had no idea that beneath my calm exterior, I was mapping out the final act of control. Revenge wasn't about exposing her. It wasn't about shaming her in front of friends or family. It was about reclaiming what she had taken from me. My power, my presence, my dignity. I started shifting things subtly. Social invitations she expected me to attend? I politely declined. Family events? I made excuses. Weekends she imagined we'd spend together? I disappeared into quiet trips, sometimes just for a night, sometimes for the entire weekend, leaving her to face our home alone. Each absence was a small fracture in her world. She had relied on my constant presence, my unwavering support, and now I was slipping through her fingers like water. At home, I became an observer rather than a participant. I noticed her panic when she realized I wasn't around to share chores, conversations, or plans. She started leaving subtle notes around the apartment. "Dinner. Are you coming home? Please talk to me." But I answered only when convenient, with brevity, and never with emotion. Each ignored message, each delayed response, reinforced the quiet power shift. Then came the moment I knew the tide had truly turned. I had taken a work trip out of state, ostensibly to meet clients. She texted incessantly, her tone slipping from casual to desperate. I responded once, short, polite, and factual. No pleading. No excuses. And something remarkable happened. She started reaching out to her friends, asking for advice, revealing cracks in her composure that had never existed before. Jenna had always thrived on control. She had manipulated social situations, conversations, and emotions to her advantage, thinking she could glide through life unchallenged. But now, stripped of my reaction, stripped of the validation she had relied on, she was unmoored. And I watched from a distance, quietly, invisibly, as her confidence faltered. Back home I kept up the facade. Dinner was polite, smiles were offered, but intimacy vanished. Touches were minimal, conversations surface level. Friends noticed my withdrawal, but I had rehearsed explanations. Stress, work, fatigue. Nobody suspected the truth. Nobody realized that the most devastating revenge doesn't roar. It whispers in absence, in the withdrawal of what once sustained another person's world. Jenna tried everything. Gifts, gestures, apologies, but each one landed on empty ground. I had already decided. This was no longer about confrontation or argument. It was about letting her feel the void she had created. She had celebrated betrayal, and now she would live with its echo, not through shame, but through the subtle, irreversible shift in the balance of power. One evening she finally broke down, tears spilling over the edge of her carefully curated composure. "Alex, please," she whispered. I don't know what to do. Please just tell me what to fix." I stood quietly watching. Not a word. Not a gesture. Just silence. It was over. Not with screaming. Not with accusations. Not with public spectacle. Just the undeniable fact that she no longer had the same access to my world, my energy, my presence. That was the point. She had lost control quietly, irreversibly. And as I walked away from the conversation, the finality of it settled in my chest like a stone. The revenge wasn't about making her suffer in the way she imagined. It wasn't about exposing her to humiliation or shame. It was about reclaiming my life, my dignity, and my boundaries, and letting her existence recalibrate around the absence of what she had taken for granted. The lesson was hers now. Trust isn't owed, presence isn't guaranteed, and betrayal has consequences that no amount of charm or apology can erase. Weeks turned into months. Jenna kept trying, like a moth circling a flame she could no longer reach. She tried casual touches on the couch, playful banter at dinner, subtle attempts at intimacy, but I had disappeared from the dynamic of our marriage. I was physically present, but emotionally, mentally, spiritually I had vanished. And that was the point. I started making small, irreversible changes. A few personal items, carefully selected, were removed from shared spaces. Projects she used to depend on me for were quietly reassigned or handled independently. I built routines she couldn't anticipate, habits that removed her influence from my life. It was subtle, so subtle she initially didn't notice, but over time, the absence of my compliance, my support, and my affirmation became glaring. She had once thrived on my presence, and now, without confrontation, without chaos, she was forced to reckon with her own choices. The turning point came quietly on a Tuesday evening. I came home to find her sitting on the couch, staring at a photo album of our early years together. She looked up at me, eyes brimming with a mix of nostalgia and panic. "Alex, I miss us," she said, her voice breaking. I nodded, sitting across from her. "I know." No pleading, no manipulation, just acknowledgement. And in that moment, she realized that she couldn't reclaim what had already slipped away. The trust was gone, yes, but more importantly, the dynamic had shifted. She had once held sway over my attention, my energy, my life. Now the power was mine to withhold, and I chose to keep it. From that evening onward, the change was irreversible. She attempted to recreate the closeness we once had, but I maintained distance. I remained polite, accommodating, even warm in surface interactions, but I never crossed the boundaries I had silently redrawn. Friends noticed the new rhythm, the subtle shift in our interactions. Family saw it too. Jenna had no public humiliation, no dramatic scene, but the quiet truth was unavoidable. She had lost access to the person she had taken for granted. In time, I started to rebuild. Not around her, not for her approval, but for myself. I invested in hobbies, friendships, and experiences that were solely mine. The life I had once shared with her became a space of personal sovereignty. She was present physically, but she no longer had the same role, the same influence, the same power over my world. That absence, that withdrawal was my revenge, quiet, dignified, permanent. Eventually, she tried to confront me again. This time it was anger, frustration, even entitlement dripping from her words. But I had learned something critical through this process. Confrontation doesn't guarantee justice, and revenge doesn't require spectacle. I listened, nodded, and repeated my mantra of silence. I didn't argue. I didn't justify. I didn't explain. The lesson had been delivered, quietly but unmistakably, and there was nothing left to say. Looking back now, months later, I realized the true power of absence. It's invisible, patient, and impossible to counter once it's established. Jenna's choices had destroyed her influence over my life, and she could neither reclaim it nor escape the consequences. The quiet justice I enacted wasn't vindictive, it was restorative. I reclaimed my dignity, my boundaries, and my self-respect, and in doing so, I taught a lesson more permanent than any shouting match could have delivered. Betrayal has consequences, and those consequences can arrive without fanfare. In the end, I found peace, not revenge in the dramatic sense. I had taken what was mine, my presence, my power, my life. She remained, but her control, her sway, her entitlement, all of it had vanished. And that silence, that absence, was louder and more enduring than any scream could ever be. I learned that dignity is the ultimate revenge. Boundaries are unyielding. Self-worth is non-negotiable. And sometimes the most profound justice comes not from retaliation, but from simply walking away, quietly, deliberately, irreversibly.